So my name is James Holden. I'm the director of the Cloud Analytics team, and I'm responsible for Cloud Insights. And what I'm going to show you today is a preview of our latest functionality called a secure module that's looking at the user access on data services, either on premises or out in the cloud, and looking for kind of behavioral changes on those to identify where there's any kind of malicious activity, unexpected activity, and alert organizations to when they're going wrong. So, just a little bit of background. Everyone's heard of the Snowden situation. He downloaded a lot of documents out there, touched stuff that he probably shouldn't have touched, and shared them out there. But the Snowden incident is just a very kind of high-profile one. These kind of incidents happen continually across organizations when people are accessing the wrong sort of data, something that they're not actually entitled to look at. And it may be from a unintentional basis, or it might be from a malicious activity. But understanding how your end users are consuming the data in the back end is kind of a key component of anyone that's running a data service. And as NetApp sees our kind of role in the world as being the organization that helps people build out data fabrics, we want to be able to give you the ability to not only run that data fabric, monitor that data fabric, optimize it, but also to secure that environment. So you have careless users that don't secure their files. You have people that unfortunately download the wrong file in their email and run some ransomware. And what we want to be able to do is identify when those occurrences are happening and start getting to the ability to alert against them, and then alert so that actions can be actually taken against them. Things like increasing the snapshots of that data, quarantining users, quarantining files, but protecting all that back end. So a lot of different breaches out there, some third-party recommendations on how much has actually happened. It's a situation that needs tool sets out there to be able to look for and find what's actually occurring. If it is a malicious or a compromised user, or if it is an accidental, unintentional action, or if it's some device that's been lost or stolen in infrastructure. So what we have is the ability with Cloud Insights to start building up a picture of how organizations work and how they're accessing their data sets. So what we do is we build out an ability to get visibility across the entire data services platforms, whether it be on the on-premises infrastructure or out in the cloud, get that visibility to look across all of it, identify where there's vulnerabilities that are coming in, any kind of gaps in that compliance, anything, we get the full list of auditing of the events, and we can also start looking for those misuses or compromised or risky behaviors out there. And the way we do it is we get the kind of the centralized visibility, we feed all that data into Cloud Insights, we start using our analytics and our kind of back-end engines to start understanding how that data access has been on a normal basis, and when it's outside of the normal ranges. We're doing so by looking at what we call the community behavior sets. So marketing, look at marketing documents, they look at some technical marketing docs, they look at sales documents, but not necessarily they look at legal documents or HR records. So if I was starting to delve into those, that starts to be a little bit of a red flag of what am I actually doing as a user. But what we can do is identify what a community is, who should belong to that community, and what kind of access they should have to those file sets. So we audit every user activity on the data itself. So who opened a file, who read from the file, who wrote to the file, who deleted any of the data. And what we can then do is say that, well, that user belongs to this community. They're part of this subset of people that do these sort of activities. They're also part of this other community that does this sort of activity. So when they then start moving outside of it, and they start accessing other pieces of the data fabric or access other components out there, we start to alert and detect that behavioral change. So what we're doing is we're building up a community knowledge and then looking for behavioral changes on top of it based on their file access rates. Once those alerts have been detected, any kind of behavioral change, what we'll start doing is we'll start sending emails out, alerts, ticketing records, or we can start pushing the data out to tool sets that can start creating actions against it. Things like NetApp's workflow automator, where we can start maybe increasing the snapshots, or we can start denying access to the files. So if you think of, you've unfortunately downloaded some ransomware, it's now off and running and it's encrypting all the shares that you've ever had access to, we can start detecting that that's happened and snapshotting that data so that we've got something to recover against in case it's gone on too long.
These communities and say rules that who should be accessing what data.
Yes.
Is that a statically defined or manually defined kind of thing, or does the analytics build a knowledge base or create a baseline and then add to it, seeing that this is normal, this is abnormal behavior?
Yeah. So there's two aspects of that kind of machine learning capability that we put into this. The first one is that community base. We dynamically look for your particular user behavior and profile and fit it to a community. So we understand that you're accessing these documents on a normal basis, and it takes a couple of weeks to understand what you should be doing and what you are doing. But once we're warmed up and we're knowing, it's just an automatic piece to maintain it. And sometimes you will stop being in part of a community. You might have changed your role. You might have, it might be a seasonal activity, but we'll have learned the behavior of what you do normally and then start putting a risk profile against it when you start deviating from that.
I ask obviously because it's not scalable when you go to a certain level after that. It becomes very difficult to maintain. So some sort of intelligence in that sense is not only useful in that sense to automatically change it, but also then it monitors the monitor, if you like. Because if I'm the person managing all of this, I might actually make myself part of all the communities that I need to be part of.
Yeah, you are. The machine is controlling the communities. So we're not actually exposing or giving a name to what the community is. It's actually just a hash. Right? But that little hash that gets associated with how you've behaved follows you and follows those users and the community, who else is in there. And there's relationships between communities as well. So legal and HR might speak to each other. So there's a relationship between these people and those people, but they're not looking at the deep level code of ONTAP or something like that. So they're not getting the full picture, but the community, dynamic nature of those communities, we build up that picture for organizations. And you could have tens of thousands of people in the organization. We're pulling the data from the likes of LDAP or Active Directory to base that knowledge. Who's related to who's my manager, who's my employees. But that just serves as a purpose for who do I notify next.
So the communities are really a correlated set of behaviours, rather than being here's an organisational structure that defines a community. It's you behave in the same way as these three other people, and so you're in the same community.
Yes.
And you may behave, part of your behaviour may correlate very highly with another 6 people, and you'll be in another community there as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Where is the data gathering for this? So you get some relatively static information out of AD and LDAP, but the actual user behaviour, where are you gathering that information from? So when I open the file, how are you detecting that I'm opening a
so
file?
we're getting so I'm accessing the actual the data layer itself. So if it's on a NetApp device, I'm using something asynchronous F policy to get that information. So
client-side agent monitoring, so you can't tell what applications that I'm running, what is triggering that access to the file.
No, I'm just looking at who's accessed the file and when they access the file, and then auditing that record. So I look for, and I'm not looking at what they did in the file. I'm not looking at what's in the file. I know the name of the file and the access type and who it was from.
And is that the extent of the scope?
That's,
not looking
yes.
at network perimeter and
that's the extent of all we need to do to be able to start picking up that behavioral change.
Just boundarying the capabilities are going to be.
Yeah, because the more that you add to that kind of picture, the more data that we'd have to start consuming.
Absolutely.
And already, that can actually be a huge amount of data.
Certainly is for other vendors.
Yes. So the reason we can do this, and we've never been able to do anything like it before, is because we've moved to a SaaS platform with Cloud Insights. The fact that we can now start looking at putting in these machine learning capabilities that are having to scale out in the back end and with load balance to start feeding that data in is one of the key kind of components of all the new features that we've got within Cloud Insights. The kind of quickness for us to innovate and bring in features like our cost optimization, our Kubernetes monitoring, or our secure functionality. So the deployment is very simple. It's very much in line with how we deploy against any other kind of infrastructure or service out there. It's actually an agent-based approach. We're pulling the data in, we're feeding it every 10 seconds back up into Cloud Insights. And so there's no rule sets that need configuring. It's all done purely automatically based on our machine learning capabilities. There's no upgrades of this either. It's all a SaaS backend. We're doing all that upgrades. We're maintaining the acquisition and collection of the data as well as the actual data in the backend. And it works from the smallest data sets to the large organizations as well.
Quick question on, it's great that you don't have to upgrade the SaaS platform, of course, but the agents that you've deployed into your instances, first of all, how easy is to deploy those agents, but also then to upgrade going forward?
Yeah, so I can actually show you a deployment of an agent. I'll jump to that in a second. I'll install an agent on my Mac, and I'll show you. It won't be collecting the secure data, but it will be collecting performance data, and I'll show you how quick it is to actually start doing that. It normally takes 2 minutes, so we'll give that a go.
That'd be good. Thanks.
So what we do is we deploy that little lightweight agent within the customer's environment. We collect data from their LDAP or their Active Directory. We collect it from whatever the point that data collector at. At the moment, we're doing it for the ONTAP management software sets, the likes of clustered data ONTAP, CVO, and we're doing it on a storage virtual machine basis. So we've got a subset of the data sets. You can run multiple agents, you can run multiple collectors, and they can all feed into the Cloud Insights instance. And there we go. And there we are building up that kind of community understanding. We're looking at how the common file access patterns are developing. We're using those machine learning algorithms to kind of pull all that data sets together. So I can see that Alexia and Mary and Samantha are all highly related, and it's kind of Samantha's at the center of the hub and spoke picture there. But it's all dynamically calculated. There's no nice manual rule sets that are being introduced. There's no kind of administration of this. It's all in the back end. It's just now going to start firing out alerts about that user access rates.
So it doesn't actually impede a user. It's more of an analytics tracking type of mechanism.
Yeah, so the end user here will not know that it's actually in place or being run.
So if they end up in a document that they may or may not have
access, well, they've accessed it, they've got access to it, they've opened it, they've done something with it, they could come out of it, we will then understand that they've gone outside of their behavioral norms. And it's not probably one document, it's the more likely situation, and I can probably show you off camera later, but a user that's starting to do something outside of the behavioral norms, where they're accessing hundreds of files all at the one go. And the potential is that it's something like a ransomware is actually occurring in the environment. They're starting to now write to the files and write to a lot of files. That's really kind of not what they would normally be doing.
But it's more of a reporting and not a, hey, we're going to go lock this person down and
well, what we can do on the basis of that, so when we generate the alert, we're now saying this behavioral pattern is outside of the norm, flag up the alert, we can then kick off events in other systems that could do stuff like that.
So it could do that.
We could send that an alert and something like a WFA, a workflow automator, or any kind of the automation tool sets could then take actions against it. So at that point, it's just kicking off a cookbook or a run event to do something about it. Okay. So yeah, you could then start increasing the snapshots or quarantining the user or just an email to the manager. Yeah, there's a load of different, like a hierarchy and progression of how strict you could be against it.
Okay.
Yep. Did it just jump a couple of slides? No. Right. So what we're doing is we're looking at that behavioral rate and what is norm and what is outside of the norm. And over here, what you can see is the normal kind of activity. What we're determining is a low-risk event, warning events, and critical events. And then we're highlighting up each one of them. And what we can then do is put a status against it. So it's a new event that's occurred in the system, or it's an event that I'm working on, or there's a action that needs taking. We can give recommendations on what those actions are. So here I've got a critical event. The activity rate has changed. It's gone up by, it looks like 1,000%. It's recommending that I quarantine that user. So if I have all of a sudden started accessing 1,000% more files than I normally do, I'm probably doing something out of the norm. So we can give the full list of who's doing what, where it's being done, and a recommendation against it, if it is abnormal.
So I'm assuming that the system, obviously the platform doesn't itself has the capability to quarantine a user, so it'll probably send a command or a run.
Yeah, kicking off something else.
So is it typically a REST command going, REST API type sort of thing?
Everything we've got is REST based. Right. So when we send out an alert, there's multiple ways we can send out an alert. How we can send that alert. Email is the easiest one, but we can have our data pulled from us with our REST API as well.
But I'm thinking more about taking action at that point. So for example, if a company chooses to say, well, this is serious.
Yep.
So Snowden effect that you're talking about,
yes.
Someone leasing disgruntled employee,
yep.
quickly downloading tons of data to take with them. It might be too late to raise an alert and someone taking action. So that could be an event where a company says it has to be automated and we sort out whatever it was later.
Yeah, and it's up to at that point we're making it up to the organization's choice how quickly they want to action or what they want to action against it. The easiest one is to do an email. Let's alert the manager. We know who the manager is because we've got the tie-in with the LDAP system, and or the Active Directory. We can see who belongs to who in that structure. But we can also send that to an operations center that they can then take an actions against, or we can then pass it to something else that could do a script against it.
Right, okay.
Question. Exactly what type of metrics are used to define this baseline that identify the normal behavior for a user? What exactly are you monitoring to?
So every one of those users' interactions with files.
With what?
Files.
Okay.
So you're opening Tech Field Day presentation. Yep. You open Tech Field Day. Everyone here opens Tech Field Day presentation, but not everyone here opens payroll compensation Excel spreadsheet.
So access, I don't know,
Yep.
to certain shared folders on the network.
Shared folders.
Files.
Yeah, one of the files are. So that picture then gets, it knows there's be certain files out there that won't ever be opened, but they'll be sat within a folder structure that could be part of that community.
And also things like copying and moving files.
Yep. So if the file gets moved, it's understood that is it's probably going to be moved to a similar location to part of the community's access. So it will be known about where it is and what it's which community is it part of.
And you can monitor only access to files that are hosted on NetApp systems or anywhere.
The initial release will be on NetApp systems, and then we'll start moving into some of the public cloud offerings, like say Dropbox or OneDrive,
Okay.
and then pulling it from those.
And other things like access to logins to servers or, I don't know,
Yeah, so-
applications.
So we're not tracking. We're only tracking the file access. It's that user behavior, not the system access.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Returning to the monitoring just NetApp systems, are we talking about file shares that are hosted on a NetApp appliance, or what if I've got Windows virtual machines that are my file servers? Are we covering that at all?
So for me, ONTAP can be run anywhere. It can run on a FAS device, or it can run on a virtual machine. So any ONTAP layer will.
Most of my file servers are a Windows file
Yep.
server where it's sitting on some FAS underneath. The Windows file server is where my data is. That's what I want you to monitor.
Okay.
Is that the functionality you're
So I'll
currently
be
doing?
not allowed to say the SIFs word. So I'll say SMB instead. So any SMB share out there, we'll be able to see. Yep. So this is the kind of information we will be pulling. So the type, date of when the incident actually occurred, what that user was doing versus what their community was doing at that time point. That's the start of, are they outside of the behavioral norm? And we have information, what their name is, because we've tied into RAD. We've actually got the pictures of people, email addresses, the managers, what departments they belong to, phone numbers, where they're located. The other piece that we've actually can start to see is if you're accessing, based on the geotags of where the IP is coming from, if you're accessing it in Hong Kong and you're accessing it in London, how you're in the same place twice. We can look at what the community does over time, and then we can start looking at all the assets that community can access and what they should be accessing. So we now have a detailed activity log. We've got an alert, and we can correlate that incident back into the end user and the other file structures. So if you have any compliance pieces about you need to look for these malicious activities, any kind of HIPAA, PCI, they've all got certain pieces where it needs to SOC to. Who's accessing what file and why are they accessing it? And there needs to be a justified reason. We've actually got the audit logs to show exactly what occurred, and when it goes out of that norm, what's actually happening with it. So we have that forensics. Here you can see I've built up the picture over time of what the reads versus the creates versus the other requests on those files actually are. So we've now got that visibility. We can do the impact analysis on it and go down to who or when it happened, what the user was, what their activity, a read event, the full path of how they got to it, what kind of file they were actually accessing, what device they came from, and what the location they came from to it. So at that point, if you are having to do a forensic or an auditable kind of compliance event and see who's done what and when they've done it, we've got the full background information on what actually occurred and who did what in the infrastructure. So if there is a breach and a sales guy is determined he wanted to go to a new company and take his entire customer record sets with him, we'll be able to see and show exactly what occurred there.
One question. Cloud Insight is clearly a great tool for infrastructure administrators, but these security-specific functionalities shouldn't be handled by infrastructure administrators, should be handled by dedicated security teams. So I can see an overlapping of responsibilities. How do you manage exposing these different aspects of the solution for different teams, and how can they work together? And
Yep. Yeah. So it's a little bit of a debate internally within us at the moment. Is it under the purview of the security team to get this information, or is it under the responsibilities of the people that actually look after the data, which is the storage team, to make sure that nothing out of the norm is going on with that?
I'm asking because, for example, in my organization, the security team is the one that is responsible to highlight any possible security incident.
Yes, but it's also probably the storage team's responsibility for setting up the access to the shares in the first place, sure, and making sure that those shares have the right profiles and permissions against them. So what we believe we are doing is giving an extra kind of capability for those storage admins to give value back to the security side of the organization as well.
Okay, let me rephrase the question then. Can you filter access to different functionalities of Cloud Insight for different teams, for different groups of...
So can I, like a role-based access that my
Yes.
security team can only see the security side of the house. And so we've taken an approach where we have role-based access. You can be a full administrator of the system where you could set up the data collections. You can be a user of the system, or you can be a guest in the system. Now, the user can't set up new collectors, they can't change collectors, they can't look at any of the kind of credentials behind the system, but they can see the data and they can monitor it, analyze it, and create their own dashboards. The guests can just visualize the data. So we've not split out the secure functionality is only for the secure people and you have to be in that role. It's something that we're waiting on customer feedback on that functionality. Is that something we actually need to do or not? Because it'll be one of the weekly feature updates if we need to add a secure role to the product set.
So asking the room for that feedback. Yes, please, RBAC immediately.
Yeah.
Yes. Anybody disagree with me?
No, absolutely with you. The thing is, there is nothing wrong for storage and systems team to have a visibility also on the security side of things. But I know for sure that me or my managers wouldn't want the security team to put their nose into metrics like IOPS or, I don't know.
Okay.
Or
I was actually thinking you were going to go from the other direction, but that's an interesting way.
I would go in the other direction, but there's no reason for the storage team to be able to see the behavior of an individual user. There is an HR issue if the storage team can see this because it's not required for their role.
It all depends on the company policies.
Absolutely.
So,
and this is why you have to accommodate different policies through RBAC.
Please implement this.
Okay, that's a great piece of feedback. Thank you.
So James, just to add to the discussion, so the user behavior analytics is available only on the premium subscription?
Yes.
Right? But it's available in the same graphical interface, right?
Yes.
Same portal, right?
Absolutely, it's the same interface. Yeah, the transition between the free editions is actually fairly seamless as long as you're upgrading. So you go from the free trial is the full functionality. At the moment it's standard, but when the premium comes out, it will be the premium functionality. You can downgrade to basic and it'll be then free. But upgrading, you can upgrade to standard and then you can upgrade to premium. And it's the same UI, it's the same instance. You've got the same data, you're just increasing the amount of retention on it, the amount of analytics that we're putting on top of it, the cost optimization components or the secure components or whatever it may be. Okay. So the belief we have with this is that we're going to be different from other tool sets out there with this functionality. We've got the performance data, we've got the inventory data, we've got the cost data, and we've got the security side of the house, all within the Cloud Insights. So if you're looking at building out a data fabric and you want to be able to understand what's happening with the data, how much it's costing, how it's performing, is it secure, the Cloud Insights is going to have all that data sets behind it. We're different from other kind of security tools out there as well because we're not doing any kind of blacklist or whitelist of the rule sets. We're not having to individually define who is in which community. It's not based on single alerts of what's going on, but it's actually that wealth of behavioral change analysis that we're actually doing. And it's very easy to get up and running. Downloading and getting Cloud Insights running takes a few minutes. Adding the Cloud Insights secure functionality to it is just another agent collection. And I promised that I would show it in a few minutes how that works. So that's why we think we're different. Now, I will go and do that little demo now and just show you a install.
Just a question real quick. So it can be deployed within 30 minutes, which is great.
Yep.
How would you advise a potential customer on, sure, it can be deployed in 30 minutes, but obviously it will take time to be able to collect and analyze that information so that it becomes usable for the administrator. Yeah. And I understand it probably varies by organization size, complexity, and all that stuff, but how would you advise a potential customer, like, maybe don't set up your alerts for X amount of time so that, the algorithm can figure out the structure?
So it's not actually, you don't have to set up any alerts per se. The system will start creating alerts itself. Okay. It's the actions that you can do on those alerts that you will have to customize. So where they go to, how they get out of the system. But if you employ it today, 2 weeks later, we'll have got a fairly decent wealth of knowledge about how that communities out there are behaving. As long as the people are in the office, they've not gone on 2 weeks vacation, they haven't touched anything, we'll start understanding how they normally behave. And as they enter the system for a few weeks, we will start learning their normal profile. And
so a couple weeks would be a typical on-ramp?
Yeah, 2 weeks. 2 weeks is a kind of a good starting point. But again, it depends. Mileage varies. Right. Organizations have different profiles. Some people have a lot less frequent access to file systems than others. And it depends how many users are actually interacting with it. If there's not much usage, maybe once every 6 months, well, there's not going to be much of a community there, so to base that on. Right, I'll show you how quick it is to deploy that agent, and then so I'm just logging back into that lab instance of Cloud Insights, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my data collectors, and I'm going to pick add a data collector for my Mac OS. So this is exactly the same sort of process and principle behind any of the agent deployments I have. So first of all, I need to choose a security key, because the security key gives me, or this device, the communications back up to my Cloud Insights server. And it's as you can see, it's a nice long little hashed key there. I've got multiple ones that have been in there. I've got my demos from Google Next. I've got some individuals that have created their own little keys on it. I copy this to clipboard, and then I come down here, open a terminal, drop it in, and press enter. Put my password in, because it's going to write to my box now. It's now starting to install my agent. And what I will now do is go back over to here and show all dashboards. Let's see. All right.
Hey, James, could you increase the text size?
On here,
Yes.
actually, if I do, is that any better?
We
And
can
the-
barely see the commands in the terminal.
Oh,
And, yes.
ah. Where is it? Where's my font size gone now? Bigger. Yep. So what it's done is it's dropped in my Mac's activity, and as you can see, it's my MacBook name. Started reporting in. Thinks it's what 12. Oh, I'm in East Coast time, by the way. That's why it's at 3 o'clock here. But there it is, pulling in the data in. I zoom in on these windows here. You start seeing the time points that it's actually dropping those performance metrics in every 10 seconds. So that's how simple it is to deploy those. Okay.
I presume that this is something that you would automate via a script.
So if you were doing,
Something like that.
yeah,
And
Ansible, you're going to deploy these via something
Exactly.
like an automation tool set and get it out there, deploy it across the entire environment.
an upgrade would probably be the same thing deployed
Yep.
again. So in place
Yep,
of-
overwrite. It's a configuration file. At the end of the day, it's a Telegraph agent. So it's just updating the config file.